Thank you, Gordon. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Governance and Ethics Committee. I'm Councillor Tom Marino, the chairman of the committee. Before we start, I would like to explain for the benefit of members of the public who may be watching that today's meeting is being held both over Zoom and with councillors present and COVID compliant in the meeting room. I can confirm that those present in the room are sitting socially distanced and are thus permitted to remove their face masks while seated. In addition to myself, the other members of the committee in attendance are councillors Adrian Abbs, subbing for Councillor Cottam, Jeff Beck, Rick Jones, Tony Linden, David Marsh, Andy Moore and Claire Rolls. We also have parish council representatives on the committee, councillors Bill Graham from Shoreham-Donington Parish Council and David Southgate from Bucklebury Parish Council. Parish councillors are permitted to speak at the meeting, but they are not permitted to vote on the items. Joseph Holmes, Julie Gillespie, Sarah Clark and Catalin Bogos are the officers who will be advising the meeting. Sadie Owen is in attendance as the clerk to the meeting and Gordon Oliver as the Zoom host. Other members, councillors James Cole and Howard Wollaston are here as observers and Ian Murray is here from our external auditors. Please can I ask everyone present in the meeting area to make sure they have their microphones placed as much in front of them as possible and ask you to make sure that you speak directly into it. If we hear the evacuation alarm this evening, we must leave the building immediately. Please proceed via the safe emergency exit route, which will be shown to us by the trained officers present. Please follow any instructions given by the trained officers present. The assembly point is the Newbury Station multi-storey car park. Anyone requiring assistance down the stairs will be assisted accordingly by the trained officers present. Do members have any questions about the way in which the meeting will be conducted before we proceed? Okay, great. So we'll move on to item 1, apologies. Sadie, have we got any apologies?
Councillor Jeff Mays and Councillor Jeremy Cottam.
Great, thank you. So we'll move on to item 2, the minutes. Are members willing to accept the minutes of the previous meeting as a true and accurate record? Does anyone have any comments they'd like to raise? Councillor Linden.
Thanks, Chairman. Just quite minor ones. We've got on the people to attending. So after Jeremy Cottam, Vice Chairman, you've got Graham. It should be Bill Graham. And in the minutes on part 1, 17, the minutes, I think we might have missed out than the Unitary Council in the sentence where it's on my bullet point.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Linden. Are we happy to move the minutes with those minor amendments made? Have a proposer for that, please. Councillor Rolls. Councillor Moore, second. Everyone in favour, please raise their hands. Okay, great, thank you. I'll sign those minutes at some point this evening. Item 3, declarations of interest. Sadie, have we had any declarations of interest?
No declarations of interest.
And are there any from the floor? No, can't see any. So move on to item 4, the forward plan. Officers and members, do you have any amendments that you'd like made to the forward plan? Councillor Linden, is that an old hand?
Oh, sorry,
Zoom
yes,
hand.
it is. I'll remove it.
Councillor Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't see anything in here about the Constitution. You'll know there's the review going on. We took last time an update. I'm assuming that it's still the intention to come forward with the Constitution review and to actually schedule that in. I think would help to put a little bit of gentle pressure on the Constitution review task group as well.
Okay, does anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, thank you. In fact, I had agreed, and I think it's Councillor Rolls raised at the last meeting to bring forward an update, which hasn't come to this meeting. So that will come to the next meeting, and hopefully then the forward plan will be fully populated with the future items and reports as they come through.
Great, thank you. Councillor Linden.
Yes, Chairman. At the moment, councils within Berkshire and the Royal Berkshire Borough Authority are reviewing code of conduct. So I just wondered when we're likely to be looking at it following the LGA model conduct.
I think, Chairman, that will be a matter for the Constitution Review Task Group as well. The Code of Conduct as it stands is currently in Part 13 of the Constitution, which will be reviewed as part of the overall review. What I would say is that West Berkshire Council's Code of Conduct as it currently stands has many of the recommendations that are within there. So we're not in the same position as some authorities, but that will be picked up, Councillor Linden, in due course.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Any more comments from the floor? Can't see any. So the full plan will be noted. Okay, so moving on to item 5, the internal audit update report. I think Julie's going to introduce this one for us.
Yes, good evening. So this is my standard quarterly update report. This one covers the period for the end of Q2. And really the key message in the report is in section 4.5, where it mentions that there's no significant issues of concern that we've identified during our work this quarter that we need to highlight to committee. And that is supported by the findings in the work that we've completed under 5.1. There's a table of the reviews the actual reports that were completed. Most of them were schools. And we've mentioned in section 5.4 that the focus of the team for the last couple of quarters was actually to catch up on the school visits. So we had quite a few this year because they were postponed or cancelled because of COVID last year. So we had double the amount that we would normally have. And most of those reviews now are completed. So that's good. And the other item I just wanted to highlight was section 5.5, where I'm giving an update each quarter on the amount of time we're spending on COVID related work. And up to the end of Q2, we've spent 75 days. I had thought it would reduce over the rest of the year, but there's new COVID grants, business grants that have come out. So we will end up doing some more assurance work on that over the year. So they're the key messages. And the report has the usual appendices. Appendix A gives a list of the completed work for the period. Appendix B is current work and the different stages of that work. And then Appendix C is the anti-fraud work plan. So that's just a brief overview. And if anybody's got any questions.
Okay, thank you, Julie. Does anyone want to speak on this item? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I think looking at the long list of current audits, I commend the work of the team because I think it's you're going through a hell of a lot of work with a very small team, so it's good. On the current work, when it says current follow-ups, I presume they are follow-ups because there were previous issues in audits. I just wondered how those were going, how they were looking.
Yes, you're correct. We follow up a standard, anything that's given a weak or very weak opinion, and also some of the satisfactory audits. We're making progress on them. And I can't really sort of give an outcome on some of the work, even if it's in draft, because we need to verify what we've done before I can actually give an overall view of what the opinion is going to be. But the work so far is looking reasonably healthy, that the progress has been made. But yeah, I can't comment on individual ones until we've actually agreed what the outcome's going to be, which we won't know until the work's completed.
Thanks.
Great, thank you, Julie. And I'd like to echo the comments about the work of the team as well. I've got Councillor Rolls next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, and I'd like to echo that the same comments myself. It was just a small point on page 21, where there's some gaps on the update position as at the 30th of September, I think 21, for personal budgets and street works traffic regulation. I just wondered if there was a particular reason why there was no update on those items. Thank you.
That's because those items haven't started yet. So that it was sort of the audit process, depending the size of the audit, the complexity of it can take quite a bit of time, but those haven't commenced yet, or they, at the end of the Q2 they hadn't. Some have since commenced.
Sorry, can I just add to that, Chairman?
Yeah.
Would it be perhaps worth just highlighting that, or just putting that in the report for sort of sake of completeness, so that it's clear what hasn't started or if it's ongoing, etc. It's just a comment.
Yeah, I can put that on the table. Fine to do that. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Julie. Any other comments from other members in the room? Okay, I can't see any. So as the recommendation is to note the report only, there's no need to vote on the item. So we'll move on to item 6, the external audit plan and fee, financial year 2020-2021. I think Joseph's going to take us through this.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. And we have Ian Murray and David Johnson here from our external auditors, Grant Thornton. And take us through the report, but just to highlight it, it's a requirement of the external auditors to highlight to the Governance and Ethics Committee as those charged with governance the audit fee and the audit plan for the year ahead. So that's contained in the report. I'll hand over to Ian, whose name on here is shown as David Johnson. I would say this, but there is only one David Johnson, but it is Ian who you can see on the screen, who's here in person.
Sorry, do we need to suspend standing orders before they come in, or are they allowed to?
No. No, they're fine to come in at full
Okay,
council
great,
in December. There was a change to allow them to come in.
That's great. Thank you for that.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thanks. I think Grant Thornton and West Berks IT is struggling to communicate slightly this evening. So it's nice to be here in person for the first time. And thank you all for inviting us along this afternoon. So we have, as Joseph just said, we've got the audit plan for the year, the audit of the year ended the 31st March 2021. Unfortunately, coming slightly later than we probably would have liked. And as I'm sure members are aware, one of the challenges we have at the moment is dealing with the backlog of local authority audits as a result of the COVID pandemic. In terms of key pages in the pack, I think it's really pages 33, 34 and 35 that I need to take members through. These are the significant risks we've identified in relation to our financial statements audit. Many of these are maybe familiar to members if they've seen one of our audit plans previously. The risks on page 33, they're there because they're in every single external audit. They're risks that we're required to treat as significant under auditing standards. One of those is around revenue recognition, which we're actually able to rebut. So we're able to say isn't relevant to West Berkshire. And then the one below is in relation to expenditure, and that's about the year in which income and expenditure is recognised in the accounts. Moving on to page 34 in your packs, the first one there is a risk in all external audits, and that's really looking at how management might override controls and particularly geared towards the inherent risk that fraud might occur in the production of the accounts. And then the last two are the bottom one on page 34. The last three, the bottom one on page 34 and the two on page 35. These are ones which again are hopefully familiar. These relate to the big areas of estimation uncertainty in the financial statements, and that's around the valuation of land and buildings, valuation of investment properties, and also the valuation of the pension fund net liability. And those are large numbers in your financial statements, and they're estimates. The council uses expertise to arrive at those numbers, and therefore we have to pay them particular attention when it comes to auditing them. In terms of the rest of the plan, much of it is hopefully familiar, and there is a lot of boilerplate there. I should draw attention to page 40 where we set out our materiality. That's the way that we scope the audit. So that's setting out what we are going to test, but also how we would treat the significance of any misstatement we find during the audit. And then finally, before I talk about the fee, just touching on the value for money arrangement. So this year, the National Audit Office introduced a new code of practice. And so we've got a slight change in the way that we're doing our value for money work this year. And it's focused around three areas. There's a financial sustainability, governance, and improving economy efficiency and effectiveness. At this stage, whilst we've identified some areas of focus or some themes that may emerge, we anticipate emerging through the work, we've not identified any areas of significant risk or significant weakness. And I think just touching on fees, because it's remiss of us not to talk about fees. It seems endlessly these days. So as I'm sure members will be aware, there is an ongoing conversation within the PSA contract and with local government about establishing a sustainable level of fees for the amount of work that we're expected to do, particularly to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of the Financial Reporting Council as our regulator. We're proposing a fee increase this year, in addition to the scale fee that was awarded through the contract. We've set the reasons out for that. Some of this is driven by changes to auditing standards and the need to do more work around property, plant and equipment and pensions. But some of it is also driven by the change to the code that I mentioned in relation to the value for money work. I wasn't proposing to say very much more there, but happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great, thank you for that. So I've got a couple of hands up. So I've got Councillor Linden first.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a slight correction, Ian, on page 31. We tend to be slightly different from other local authorities locally. We approve our budgets in March. We have a March meeting, so I just thought we'll correct that. I concur with you on ISA 240 because I just discussed it on our pre-meeting for audit and governance, and this is a general point. But of course, I think we've always got to be wary of problems, and one or two other authorities and elsewhere, this could be a problem. So we've got to be aware of dealing with fraud. But I'd like to thank you for putting the rebut in the report, so anybody who queries it understands this is a vital general point. I'll leave it at that. So at the moment, Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Then I've got Councillor Abbs next.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Actually, so you referred to fees earlier, and that's some stuff I made notes on earlier. Excuse me. Last year, there was about 35k extras from the fee that was the fee that we were supposed to be charged, and the 109 that we were charged. And this year, we have 26 extra for what you've just said is slight changes to the VFM, and another 17k for the other thing that you're being asked to do that's extra. What I couldn't really see was any examples of what this extra strain on you actually is, and I'm sure there is an extra strain. I just couldn't see what it was. So would you mind giving me a couple of examples of why we're being asked to pay an extra £26,000 for some slight changes, as you just said, and another 17,000 for more robust testing? Thank you.
Yeah, so if I describe the value for money changes as slight changes, then I misspoke. The changes to value for money are quite fundamental. So under the old approach, I don't want to take all of your things. Under the old approach, we had very limited scope. It's very much based around a risk assessment, and if we didn't identify any risks, we didn't do a huge amount in terms of additional work. So, and that was then reflected in the reporting. So we issued a conclusion, a value for money conclusion, but it was very much a limited and a tightly scoped piece of work. The new requirements from the NAO are much more involved. So rather than scoping something in because we think it's of particular risk, there is now a much bigger baseline requirement for us to look at arrangements in place at an authority. So across those three areas: financial resilience, governance, and the 3 E's. So there's a minimum amount of work that we have to do, and the reporting is different and more onerous in that rather than issuing a value for money conclusion in the way that we did under the old code, what we have to produce now is called an auditor's annual report. So we produce a commentary of the council's arrangements and our assessment of those arrangements across those three areas, and looking at based on the work we've done with auditor bodies in the NHS. Those are reports now that are running to 20, 30, maybe or more pages in some cases. So the value for money work is a significant increase in both the amount of work we have to do and then what we have to do in terms of the reporting. In terms of the other changes, a lot of these are driven by changes in. So some of it is in approach for us. So, for example, when we're talking about increased requirements of revised ISAs, mainly this is around ISA 540, and if, there is a much bigger, I think twofold. There is a move away from professional skepticism to I think professional suspicion for auditors. So we're being asked to be a lot more challenging of management in terms of how they pull particularly estimates together, and a much bigger burden on us in terms of really understanding how estimates are arrived at, the methods and techniques that are being used by management to arrive at an estimate, and then to effectively step back and work out whether that's evidence of optimism, or in some cases pessimism, to try and arrive at a certain number. And in terms of those other areas, I don't know whether officers will support this or not. We're being asked to challenge more. So effectively, if management provide us with an explanation which we can corroborate, we have to go ahead and corroborate. If we're provided with an explanation which prompts another question, we corroborate, we ask the question, and then we corroborate the answer to that question. So I think if we went back maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was quite a linear process. We would ask questions, we'd get answers, we would probably close things down quite quickly. I think now it can be 4 or 5 discussions on one point before we feel we're getting sufficient evidence to be able to say, actually, we've got what we need now to be able to get the assurances we need to be able to sign clean opinions. And I think that's a good thing. That's about improving audit quality. That's, there have been a number of examples of failure in the external audit market. And so it's understandable where it comes from, but it does mean more time for us, and unfortunately it means more time for you as audited bodies as well. Hope that answers both the questions, but happy to have another go if not.
Do you want to come back in, Councillor?
Well, I was going to hopefully summate that lot, because that was a lot of information, but thank you very much for all that information. Here's one I heard. You basically, some new rules came along which required you to look at risk. The risk in your presentation earlier said they were standard risks, because they're always included in everything. And that's resulted in all of these extra charges because of a standard risk. You're now having to do extraordinary investigation and reporting on these standard risks. So we see. Well,
yeah, I think
I just make sure I've understood.
More than we have done historically.
Okay,
so the risks haven't changed, but the response to those risks have.
So basically, we got a 17% rise in fees year on year, because we were told by the government that we had to do all this stuff, or you were told by the government you had to do all this stuff. I mean.
So not necessarily the government. So the National Audit Office sets the code.
Okay, the National.
They're independent of government, and a lot of the changes in the auditing standards are driven by the Financial Reporting Council. So
I think we'll look at the words value for money and what's now happening separately. But thank you very much, Chairman.
Right, thank you. Councillor Rolls next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, my questions was along a sort of similar vein, actually. You mentioned, and sorry, thank you very much for your presentation, which was very helpful, and the level of detail in the report. But you mentioned the skill mix, that you have to find a richer skill mix as a result of these changes. I'm assuming that I'm sure officers do get a full sort of comprehensive breakdown of how you resource that, because I guess I'm sort of alluding to the fact that are we getting efficiencies within the process from you, and actually flipping the value point on its head, what value are we getting over and above the professional advice that you're giving? Because I'm fully aware from working with law firms and in accountancy firms that in this day and age, there's a lot of value add that is actually given to clients over and above the paid advice. And I wondered if you had any comments on that. Thank you.
So I think the new value for money work actually is an opportunity for local auditors to start adding some genuine value in the work that we do. I think the old approach probably had gone too far in terms of not giving external auditors a platform for some of the things that they that they see and may otherwise have been able to share with audited bodies. It's a difficult one because I think fundamentally your external auditors, we are providing you with assurance, but we're also providing a whole suite of other stakeholders with assurance, and actually that's the role that we perform. So we'll always look for opportunities to add value, and if we think something's not quite right or could be done better, we'll always point that out. But it's not necessarily. It's not necessarily as hardwired into the approach as it maybe would be if we were providing legal advice or if we were providing advice on a kind of on a different basis. But I do think the new value for money, and it's the first year of a new approach, so it will take time. But I think with a lot of things that have gone on in local government over the last 2 years, there's clearly a need for local auditors to have an independent voice and to point out things that need to be pointed out if and when we see them. And I think the new value for money approach should give us an opportunity to do that more.
Councillor Ross, I see your hand up. Did you want to come back or?
Yeah, can I ask one other question? Are there any other changes that are coming down the track that you envisage is going to impact on this fee for next year?
So I think there are no huge changes in terms of the code, and to the best of my knowledge, there are no large changes to the ISAs. I do think there is a larger conversation going on. I don't know if members have seen the Redmond report, but the Redmond review, there is a larger conversation going on at the moment about what is a sustainable level of audit fee for external audit in the public sector. And I think, and I don't know, but I think if you looked at where fees were maybe 10 years ago, even versus where they are now, they're still lower than they were towards the end of the Audit Commission. But it's a balance that's and a conversation that's ongoing at the moment, and we're also not far off the next round of tendering for local government and what that might mean. So I'm an auditor. I'm going to hedge and caveat, and I'll never commit to anything until I actually have to sign something off. So I would hope we start to reach a point with you and with the sector where we're not having to come back and have endless conversations about fee increases time and time again.
Okay, so before I take Councillor Jones, Joseph, do you want to come in on that specifically, or do you want to come in after Councillor Jones?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman, for just coming on that specifically. So just on the audit fee point, I just had a quick look at our audit fee back in 2011-12, and it was £231,000. That dipped down to about 127,000 a couple of years later. And then audit fees did sort of dip down further. So I think as Ian highlighted as part of the Redmond review, which sort of alluded to a couple of G&Es ago, there clearly is a lot of pressure at the moment on external audit. Another audit firm was recently, in the last week or so, fined £250,000 for a local government audit, which was not up to the regulators' standards. So there's clearly a lot of pressure around this agenda at the moment. I think, as Ian said as well, we had the paper which came to full council only last month, where we opted into the PSAA, which came here beforehand as well. So we'll have to see what the outcome of that procurement is, but I'd suspect there'd be a greater gearing towards quality, away from perhaps such a low level of fee that we've had in the last few years.
Okay, thank you for that. I've got Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you for your information. My question is I realise you're not in control of this completely. Clearly, there is a lot of work to be done, and I guess we accept that needs to be done in the way that you described. But it just strikes me that the scale fee published by the PSSA, which we've agreed to join again, bears no relation to the work that you have to do. So is it relevant at all?
So I think the challenge the challenge is twofold. The PSA contract was let before a lot of the regulatory change that's happened, and that's not just happened in the public sector audit market, that's happened across the external audit profession. And I think there are other changes afoot. So not just Redmond, but there are other market forces in play in terms of the Big Four responding to things like competitions and market authority. There are lots of forces in play, which mean that the environment in which the tender was this tender was released versus the place we find ourselves today are just different. So I think that's part of it. And then I think, in fairness to PSAA, I think they're in a difficult position because the statutory framework that they've inherited means that moving the scale fee is very difficult. They've already have to consult. They have to consult so far in advance that making the changes has just been really, really difficult. And so we are in this, and I think everybody acknowledges that it doesn't really work for anyone, because what you want as audited bodies is you want some certainty about the fee that you're going to pay. What we want as your external auditors is some certainty about the fee we're going to get. And what PSAA wants to do is obviously they want to make sure that they're creating something which is sustainable and delivers at the quality in which it needs to deliver. And so the timing doesn't really help. So a lot of the changes in terms of revising the scale fee, because of the time lag, it's difficult for that to be reflected in the scale fee. But to answer the question, yes, I think that the scale fee that's reflected here it's probably too low, because it was determined at a point in time or in circumstances at a point in time which don't reflect the circumstances in which we're operating now.
Thank you.
Yeah, are there any other members in the room who want to comment? Okay, can't see any. So as the recommendation is to note and comment on the report only, there's no need to vote on it. So we'll move on to item 7, the financial year 2021-22 mid-year Treasury report. And I think it's Joseph again to take us through it.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. So this is the first report to come through to this committee since we changed the terms of reference that the committee approved a few months ago. Usually this report will go through to the executive, but it is now within the remit of G&E. So this report is the mid-year update against our treasury management strategy. There's a variety of indicators included within this, as well as some information on our commercial property investment, which the Governance and Ethics Committee requested a couple of meetings ago, so we update for that. Every year the council, the full council approves the treasury management strategy, and as part of the Prudential Code which governs, and the Treasury Management Code which governs local authority borrowing investment, we need to ensure that we have a report here as a mid-year, as well as an annual report, which will come through to the Governance and Ethics Committee. This report details some of the indicators included within that, and some of the current levels of investment and borrowing, as well as the returns which we're getting, which, given the very low level of interest rates at the moment, are perhaps unsurprisingly quite comparatively low when we look against previous financial years. Happy to take any questions, Chairman.
Great, thank you, Joseph. I've got Councillor Linden with his hand up first.
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, I've got a couple of points I want to raise, two of which are the same on two different pages. On page 51 at the bottom, the back rate has been held at 0.1%. I think it's just gone up a bit, hasn't it, Joseph?
Yes, it has gone up a little bit, but at the time that we'd written this, it was still at 0.1%. So, but you're quite right, Councillor Linden, it has gone up to 40%.
Yes, and then page 54 and page 58, 4.5B, and on 511B, it's just my bugbear at the moment. That in most cases, the property has been inherited from Berkshire County Council, which is pre-1998, or Newbury District Council upon the formation of West Berkshire District Council in 1998. And the information I got back from our solicitors was that this council was founded in the 1st of April 1974, and then we had a name change when we took over the powers of Berkshire County Council. So I just wanted to refer on those two, whether it's strictly accurate. So I know this is a minor bit, but I raised this in terms of the accounts. So I think obviously you might be aware, but I just thought I'd mention that, Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph, you'd like to come back?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Linden. So yes, for the 1998 though, that is when West Berkshire Council itself was formed, accepting your comments on the sort of how that combination happened. But just for this report, we're taking it back to when we existed as West Berkshire Council, rather than I suppose, kind of a follow-on of Newbridge Council, which is, as you say, was formed back in 1974.
Yeah, we just had a name change. So, I mean, anybody can change their names, I know, but as an authority, so I just thought I mentioned it just in terms of accuracy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Linden. Any other members in the room want to make a comment on this? Can't see any hands. So again, as the recommendation is to note the report, there's no need to vote on it. So we'll move on to item 8, member request for information. I think, Sarah, you're going to take us through this.
Thank you, Chairman. This item relates to a request for information that has been submitted pursuant to paragraph 13.37 of the Constitution, which enables a member to request access to information to be considered by Governance and Ethics, which can refer the matter to full council for consideration. The recommendation of the report is that the legal position be noted and that G&E does not refer the matter to council for further consideration. The report sets out in some detail the statutory regime which governs in effect, access to information within local government. There is the statutory regime, I think it's important to note, really is there to support openness and transparency in local government and sets out the framework by which individuals and residents can access information held by the council and to access the decision-making processes. So I think from that, it's important to note that members of the council have the same right as members of the public to access agendas, reports, minutes, to attend meetings of the authority. But members of the authority also have additional rights to access background papers relating to those matters under consideration in meetings of the council. However, I think it's also important to note that under the statutory regime, there are still qualifications. So, for example, the right of members to access background papers does not extend to legally privileged material. There is a separate statutory regime relating to matters that are executive functions. The legal provisions and the statutory framework largely replicates what is within the original provisions in the Local Government Act. And in addition, members of overview and scrutiny have additional rights to access information relating to matters under review. Although, again, that is a qualified right, and there is a procedure, a statutory procedure, by which the executive can withhold documents from OSMC. I think the matter that is the subject of tonight's request does not fall within the statutory regime, because this is not a matter that has gone to a committee. So the request for information therefore cannot be considered under that framework. In addition to the statutory rights, therefore, members, that there is also a common law provision under which members can assert that they have a need to know. The common law right that enables a member to access information can be exercised where they have demonstrated, where a member has demonstrated that there is a need to know. I think it's important to note that this right is not, or doesn't give an unfettered right to access information, and it doesn't give members a roving commission to, in effect, go through council records. I think it's important to recognise that there's also a fine line between representing the interests of ward residents generally and seeking to obtain documents which shows the council's hand in a way that could materially assist one resident and or cause detriment to the council's position. A member may have a particular interest in a matter, but that's not the same as the matter being part of the member's functions and therefore having a need to know. The report sets out the background. I believe there have been extensive communications between the member concerned and officers regarding the matter in question. The report sets out that a formal request for the documents in question was made on the 21st of June. That was then considered by the Executive Director Place, who advised that the documents in question could not be disclosed as it contained confidential, legally privileged information. There were subsequent exchanges between Councillor Rolls and officers where Councillor Rolls explained that she considered it was necessary for her to have access to the document because the facts of that matter were similar to another case in her ward. The matter was subsequently referred to myself as monitoring officer, and having considered that, I agreed that there did not appear to be any basis upon which to disclose the information in question on the grounds of a need to know. The emails which are contained within the Part 2 pack do not disclose a need to know in my view. Details of those exchanges are within the report at paragraphs 5.15 to 5.21. And on the 28th of September, Councillor Rolls requested that this matter be considered by Governance and Ethics Committee. Full details of the report detailing this particular request and also highlighting some of the exchanges that have taken place appear in Part 2, a Part 2 appendix, given that they contain various restricted documents and material. Thank you, Chairman.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Before I come to Councillor Rolls and then subsequently to open the debate, given the sensitive nature of this item and the potential for sensitive information to be necessary for the context of the debate, Councillor Rolls and other members, are you happy for the meeting to move into Part 2 and in effect take items 8 and 10 together? Before, are you happy to proceed in that fashion? Councillor Rams.
Thank you, Chairman. I would rather like to have my question answered before we move into Part 2.
Any other members? Councillor Moore.
If we did that, as you've just suggested, how would Part 8 of the agenda be minuted?
Sarah, can you?
Yes, the decision would be recorded, but the detail, so any detail regarding individuals or kind of individual cases won't be recorded within the minutes, but the decision will be a matter of public record.
Any other members want to comment on how we proceed?
If it helps, Chairman, there's no chance of information being disclosed related. It's more for a point of information for myself before we move on, and okay. For the members of the public, I'm sure will be interested. But
okay, before does anyone want to propose moving into Part 2? Okay, well, I guess we'll proceed as we were going to. So I'll come to Councillor Rolls first, as it obviously relates to her specifically, and then I'll open it up.
Thank you, Chair. Members, I've brought this agenda item to committee for the following reasons. Firstly, I believe that as members, we are entitled to access the information contained in this report under clause 13.3.6 of the Constitution. Secondly, I believe that officers are questioning my integrity as a councillor in denying me access to this information. Thirdly, I feel that this is a case where the monitoring officer's decision should be legitimately challenged under the Constitution, and the mechanism for doing this is to bring it before this committee. The report clearly sets out that members do not have an unqualified right to access information, which is entirely accepted and undisputed, particularly in social care matters where restricted access is appropriate and protected under legislation. But just taking the points that the monitoring officer has highlighted in her report. Firstly, regarding confidentiality and legally privileged information. Members, I'm going to set out to you clause 13.3.6, which clearly states where officers consider that information is of a confidential nature, which should not be openly available to the public or press, this information will be supplied to members on a private and confidential basis. Any information provided to members on this basis will be treated as such and will not be circulated outside the council. The Constitution categorically states that members will be supplied with information on a confidential basis. Denying me access where I am bound by confidentiality, I believe, questions my integrity in keeping this information confidential. Coming on to the point around legal privilege protects documentation between a solicitor and a client from third-party inspection. Our in-house legal department have provided this advice as the solicitor, and they have effectively advised the council as the client, of which I am a member. The monitoring officer goes on to state that there is no legal basis upon which to justify disclosure of this document. It is undisputed that there is no statutory provision that justifies disclosure. It is solely the Constitution that sets out members' rights to access the information in this case. Taking the point on demonstrating a need to know, members will see that I set out to the monitoring officer in clause 5.19 of this report that I believe there is a need to know basis for my request to enable me to perform my duties as a councillor for the following reasons. Firstly, officers were very happy to engage with me on a particular case in Lambourne since February 2020, as the report sets out at length. The matter was concluded with an enforcement option. Access to the report would allow me to see how this case has been concluded for the purposes of fully understanding the position of the resident and the council. It feels like as soon as a request doesn't fit the narrative, officers seek to shut you down, and there appears to be no consistency, which has made no sense to me. I have a ward case in Kintbury, as the monitoring officers highlighted, which has some identical facts to the Lambourne case. And I have highlighted these to the monitoring officer, namely, both cases indicated on forms that they wanted to claim a SIL exemption. Both cases hinge on missing paperwork. In both cases, West Berkshire Council failed to provide help and guidance to the applicant. In both cases, agents were involved. And in both cases, West Berkshire Council feels that it is inappropriate to review the case, despite this mechanism being available in the SIL legislation. How we approach enforcement in the Lambourne case is directly relevant to informing the Kintbury case. And I will give you an example, members. I would expect the report to set out why we did not charge interest to the Lambourne resident, but we did charge interest to the Kintbury resident. And this has been raised by me directly by my Kintbury resident. The report may also ultimately influence and change my stance and thinking on our approach as to how we have handled the two SIL cases. The monitoring officer deems that I have been given extensive briefing and explanations as to the action that the council has taken in this matter. Members, firstly, I am astounded that the monitoring officer felt the need to include, I counted 53 internal emails on page 83 to 117, which she describes as a sample. Perhaps she can share with us her definition of what a sample is, because it certainly isn't the same as my definition. I don't have an issue with the contents of these emails, just the sheer volume. My emails throughout that report relate to specific issues which I have raised due to serious concerns I have with how we have handled this SIL case. The extent of the email chain is due to the officers not providing me, in my opinion, with satisfactory responses. The emails also clearly show that none relate to enforcement options, which are contained apparently in the report. I therefore clearly have not been provided with any of this information, irrespective of what the monitoring officer deems to be extensive briefings and explanations. Questions still remain unanswered in my mind on this case. The monitoring officer claims that there is a risk that this request will set a precedent that similar documents, including those in social care matters. This is, in my view, members, complete nonsense. I have no idea why the monitoring officer has compared a planning matter to social care. Finally, the monitoring officer has also suggested that I am an advocate for the resident, and because I am against the council's approach, or at least challenging the council's approach, I have been denied access to this report. I may respectfully remind the monitoring officer and members that clause 2.3.4 of the Constitution states that all councillors should represent their communities and bring their views into the council's decision-making process, thereby acting as the advocate of for their communities. I'm effectively fulfilling the role I was elected to do. If we were denied access to information every time we challenged the council, officers would be preventing us from carrying out our duties. Members, I am just trying to do my job as a councillor, to challenge and hold the council to account on behalf of the resident. To close down this request is closing down the very fundamentals of democracy and the role that we were elected to do as members. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rolls. Before I open it up to the debate, I had an indication before the meeting from Councillor James Cole that he wanted to speak on this item, and I agreed that he would be able to, preferably in the part two. However, as we are not moving into part two, and this item will be carried out in part one. Councillor Cole, would you like to speak as part of part one, or would you like to wait until we move into part two?
I'm very happy to speak now. Chairman, thank you very much for letting me contribute my views. I realise you did not have to do so. I speak firstly as a co-ward member. As a co-ward member, I have a direct interest because what's been done affects my ward. The Lambourne ward case has considerable similarities to a case involving our Kimpbury resident, who I suspect has been very badly treated by this council. I remain glad to see my colleague taking up this issue. But I also speak as a past chairman of Governance and Ethics. I have to say, for this reason, I'm sad to be here. My past involvement in this committee leads me to the view that this discussion is very important. It actually goes to the root of the job that we are paid to do. Whether you feel that we're adequately paid or badly paid is not relevant. We're paid to do a job. And I'm sad this has had to come to G&E. We councillors do not run this council on a day-to-day basis. Well, some of our colleagues have been known to give the appearance of thinking otherwise. In reality, officers do that. In essence, we're here to do three things: to represent our residents' interests, to put forward and agree policies for how those interests should be looked after, and to act as the equivalent of a multi-level supervisory board to oversee what's actually done and ensure that all is done both correctly and as we wish. We have to do all three parts to do our job properly. Part of that job then is to provide challenge to officers when we consider it necessary. I realise all too well that officers do not wish to be challenged, but there are times when it is necessary, and this has proved to be one of them. We have to work within the law. But clause 13(3)(6) of our Constitution makes specific provision for circumstances where information should be provided on a confidential basis. In my view, as there is this specific provision, it is incumbent on a councillor to request all information to ensure that all bases are covered. These are not children's and family services cases or adult social care cases. I submit that multiple mentions of those services in this report are not relevant, almost scaremongering. These cases are actually about money. And at least in the Kimpbury case, there are circumstances where it appears that the council has not acted appropriately. It is therefore appropriate for a councillor to investigate fully. Looking at 13(3)(7) of the Constitution, it's entirely clear to me that Councillor Rolls is acting as a councillor and not in a professional capacity, which in any case she wouldn't be licensed to do. 511 of the report says that if a member's motive for accessing the document is indirect, improper, or ulterior, there is no obligation on their council to provide access to that. By including that section, I would argue that the writer is imputing that Councillor Rolls cannot be trusted with restricted information. I cannot accept that. The 53 internal emails. The statement about that, it's done as if it's a crime that there be this number of emails. To me, it simply indicates just how obstructive this council has been to a councillor that is trying to do her job. Members, if you believe that we can do our jobs properly without the information that we are entitled to under our constitution, then you should accept the report and agree the recommendation. If, on the other hand, you accept, as I do, that the constitution clearly allows us as members access to this information and that Councillor Rolls is trustworthy, I submit that you should reject the recommendation and allow this to proceed to full council if no other solution can be found. Thank you, Chairman, for indulging me.
Thank you. Okay, I'll open it up to the rest of the room. However, again, I will reiterate, the importance of, obviously we are in part one, so please do not refer to anything specific in the part two indices or any sort of specific names, etc. Councillor Howes, you've been very patient.
Thank you very much. No problem at all. I'm a sub for this committee, so I came at this a little bit late and read all the details. I was very shocked to find so much member communication, even though most of it's the actual information is in part two. 53 emails is an awful lot, and it raises a concern in my mind that should therefore we be signing off our emails to internal staff members with "this is confidential until we say otherwise," because if one way around is true, then the other way is round. I would not expect my questioning or my questions of an officer just to become standard fodder to be shared with everybody without at least giving me some indication that might happen ahead of time. So a little bit shocked at that, and I wouldn't want to see a repeat of it. 13.3.6, I'm afraid I agree with the other members that have spoken so far. I think it's very clear on the subject. And to try and put it as simply as possible, if I ask a question and explain why I need that information, then by default I would expect to receive it clearly marked as either part one or part two, i.e. confidential or not confidential. And if it's confidential, as a member of this council, duly elected by the public, I would expect to be trusted with that information, unless there is some evidence otherwise. And I thought we lived in a world where innocent until proven guilty. I know on a personal level, I have a feeling that Councillor Roll and no other member I actually know would start releasing information to the public that they'd been clearly told it was part two. So I'm afraid I don't like this insinuation that by sharing some information with a member that they might decide to share it with the public. I totally agree with what Claire said, Councillor Rawls said earlier, that to build the proper picture of what position I should be taking in order to assist a member of my ward, I need to have the information. It's by default, I need to have the full picture. Otherwise, I'm driving blind. So I don't really want to bang on about it, but I'm afraid I'm in support of what Councillor Cole and Councillor Roll have said so far, and you can take it as read which way I'll be voting accordingly.
Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Chairman. The recommendation is not to refer it to council. Could I ask the question, if we voted to refer it to council, would council itself be in a position to overrule the officer's recommendation and ensure that the information was released?
Sorry, I'd like to come back on that.
That is within the gift of council. Yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Linden. Did your hand came down? Have you?
No, yeah, I've got concerns. I know other councillors not present have got concerns, but quite a lot of it has to go into part two. One point leading to Councillor Moore's view, hopefully it would, if council make a recommendation, if it goes to council, that it will not be overruled by any member of the executive. But my question, which may have to be answered in part two, is, has any councillor been told and I'm referring to executive or leader member, about the content of this document or the reasons behind it, because I would be concerned if it hasn't been given in detail to a senior councillor of this authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry, do you want to come back on anything now, or do you want to wait until Councillor Rolls is finished, then come back on?
Yeah, I'm happy to wait.
Okay, Councillor Rolls.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make one other point that I didn't cover in my report because it was subsequently happened today. It was suggested to me by the head of legal that I didn't vote on this tonight because I had a conflict of interest, or I had an interest in the matter. And the reasoning for that, in the officer's opinion, was that because I had requested it under the Constitution, and I had requested this information purely on that basis and through to the monitoring officer, that I had an interest. It made absolute sense to me, not absolute nonsense to me. I do not have an interest in this matter, and I would have declared a conflict of interest if I had. And my concern is it goes back to that point about sort of almost trying to close down a member, that it was intimated that I couldn't even vote tonight. And I took offence to that, and I wanted to get that out in the public domain and to this committee, because I found that totally unacceptable as well. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm a bit confused about what we're talking about in part one and what should be reserved for part two. So close me down if I'm straying. I'm not going to disclose any confidential information, clearly. I'm very conflicted about this. I understand, and I to some extent support the contention that the role of a councillor is to represent their communities, both in general and for individual residents when they have an issue with the council. And I've done so on many occasions myself. Clearly not in anything as sensitive and controversial as this matter, which is clearly unusual. I understand there are going to be some pieces of information that are going to be very, very difficult for the council to release. And I feel that if we vote to pass it on to the council, and effectively we're passing the buck, we're just taking a difficult decision to a wider forum. And I don't know what that will actually achieve. Having said that, I don't know which way I want to vote, but I'll keep thinking about it.
Thank you, Councillor. Do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. To be honest, if we have the ability to take a vote now, I would like to take a vote on referring this issue to council and going against officer's recommendation. And if we are not able to do that, but we are able to ask the officers to release the information as originally requested, that would be a backup position. But the way I see it, I can't see anything being told to me in part two that would change the fundamental position that I now have, in which case I'm quite happy to vote on this matter for this to go to full council to be debated openly and properly.
Sarah, would we be able to, would we still have to vote on this in part two?
So no, and certainly I can respond to the issues that have been raised in part one, and if members are happy at that point to make a proposal and put that to vote, then that is entirely within the gift of the committee.
Okay, does anyone else want to come back in with any questions before Sarah wraps up? Councillor Moore.
Actually, just responding to something that Councillor Jones has just said, I realised I might have had a supplementary. So I asked about whether council had the authority to overrule. Does this committee have the authority to overrule?
Yes. So if I can clarify, Governance and Ethics Committee in effect acts as a gatekeeper for this or in this matter. So Governance and Ethics Committee either will, I suppose, accept the recommendation and that will be the end of the matter, or they refer the matter to council for decision. So it is not within the gift of Governance and Ethics to disclose the documents in question.
Okay, Thank you, Councillor Moore. Sarah, if you want to come back on most of those points that have been raised.
Yeah, so I will try to cover the main points. That there've been quite a number of issues that have been raised. I think what I would start with is that there is kind of clearly within the statutory regime, there are qualifications around information that needs to be disclosed to members. That does not impugn the members, but there are limitations on what can and should be disclosed. I think officers have not closed down members, and I think references to officers being obstructive, I think I would refute that. I think officers have communicated at length in this matter and have offered to explain the decisions that have been taken. The documents in question is a very sensitive document. It contains details of enforcement options, and there are references to comparisons within the report to social care matters. The council takes lots of enforcement action. The council prosecutes people. The council takes action against people involved in causing noise nuisance. And I think that the reference to it being unfortunate that the matter is here tonight, this is the first time that a matter has come before this committee in my memory, and I've been here for very many years. And that is because officers work on the basis of openness and transparency. And there is a clear distinction between briefing members, and I would suggest that the members have been briefed in this matter, and disclosing details of a report that there has been no basis. So the assertion that there are similarities between the two cases, there are clearly quite significant differences as well that would negate the view that has been expressed that would be relevant, or certainly that have informed the decision and the view that there has not been a need to know demonstrated in this matter. So I think sorry, I'm just trying to look through my notes. I think, yeah, I would just emphasise, I think again, that the reference to in the report, that the fact that there has been a sample of correspondence, that is exactly what it is. It is a sample. There has been further correspondence and there have been meetings. So I think I did not want to give the impression that that was all, but I think on a reading of that sample of communications, it is clear that officers have endeavoured to explain their position. They have stated that they will continue to brief members, to explain why decisions have been taken and to explain the action that continues to be taken. So I think any suggestion officers have been obstructive or have closed down members are not really supported by the facts. So that would be my view. And clearly this is a matter that Governance and Ethics is asked to take a view. Governance and Ethics acts as a gatekeeper and can refer the matter to council for determination if it considers that's appropriate to do.
Thank you, Sarah. Before we move to what? So sorry, just to clarify, Sarah. So you said that if a member wanted to propose that we sort of vote on a resolution for this now in part one, therefore basically kind of removing the need for a vote in part two, that's possible.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So before, I'm assuming, given the comments that have been made, that's probably going to occur. So I'm going to make my comments briefly before. I can see, of course, where Councillor Rolls has come from. I've spoken to her directly about this. I've spoken to her. I've spoken to the officers in question. I've read through the documentation. I've read through the emails. And like I said, I am somewhat sympathetic to it. Obviously, as elected members, we want to be in possession of all the facts before we make any decision or anything, especially when it comes to residents' concerns. However, I don't accept that the officers have been deliberately obstructive in this case at all. I don't accept I don't see any officers casting aspersions on Councillor Rolls or any other members that we aren't trusted with certain legally privileged information. Obviously, we all do follow the code of conduct. We are all trustworthy individuals. Our residents obviously put their trust in us by electing us to this council. However, I do accept that obviously there is some information that we do not necessarily need to know, especially when it comes to things like enforcement action and everything. So I'm not going to ramble on. I'm firmly in favour of the recommendation that we don't refer this to council. However, obviously, like I said earlier, given where this debate in part one has gone, I assume that someone wants to propose that we do so. So, Councillor Abbs, you've got your hand up.
Yeah,
I assume you'd like to.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd actually already proposed that. So,
does that find a seconder? Councillor Marsh. So, sorry, the recommend. So, if he's here by Zoom, he can't.
No.
Okay.
So I think
But Councillor Rolls, so Councillor Rolls will second that. So the proposal is that we refer this matter to full council now.
Why? Sorry, Chair. Why aren't I seconding it?
Because you have to be physically in the room, as I understand it, Councillor Marsh, to make a second.
For this? Sorry, for this committee, one has to be in the room to propose or second a motion. How about voting? Can I do that?
No, so members of all committees need to be in the room since the 4th of May or the 7th of May, and that changed when the legislation lapsed. So to have a vote count or to formally move or second a proposal, a member needs to be physically present.
Could I request that my vote, when we have a vote, be taken as an indicative vote, as is done with other meetings?
Yes.
Members,
yes, we can have that, Councillor Marsh, for you. We can do that for you, Councillor Marsh. Yes. So, Councillor Abbs, you've made a proposal. Councillor Rolls, a second. Sorry, Councillor Abbs, just for clarification, can you just confirm your proposal again, please? As it's been a while since we got there.
Fair enough. I'd like us to take a vote to take this issue to council, going against officers' recommendations.
Okay. So, any members in favour of that, please raise your hands. Okay. And any members against? Any wishing to abstain?
I think, Chairman, that vote has been carried.
Okay. Oh, and Councillor Marsh, your indicative vote. Sorry, before we confirm that.
I voted in favour, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, make sure that's noted. Thank you. Okay, so that has been carried. So we'll move on to item 9, which is exclusion of the press and public. Members in the room, if you agree by raising your actual hand that the press and public leave the room in accordance with Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972.